Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mark Schneiderman with the Software and Information Industry Association. Welcome to our SIIA Education Division and webinar, Understanding OER's Impact on Educational Institutions and Developers and Publishers. Most of you are SIIA members or familiar with SIIA, but for those who are not as much, we are the principal trade association for the software and digital content industry, representing about 700 companies. We have a large education division with some 200 developers of digital content, software applications, and online learning-related technologies. SIIA members invest many millions of dollars each year in developing their products and collaborate and partner with educators to meet their various needs. And the division, of course, provides leadership and advocacy, market information, and a neutral business forum for our members to collaborate with each other and with their customers. A few announcements about today's webinar and about upcoming SIIA initiatives. As you heard, this webcast is being recorded. The audio-visual file and the presentation slides will be archived on the SIIA website. You may submit questions at any time via the chat feature. We'll take all the questions, and participation will only be via chat, and we'll address those as we can through the hour and especially toward the end. We have several upcoming events. Most immediately is our EdTech Government Forum next week in Washington, D.C. In fact, we had a session at last year's event focused on open educational resources. This forum provides opportunity for SIIA members to understand the impact of government programs and public policies on education, and it's a member-only event. I'd like to now turn things over to my colleagues Lederby and Lindsay to make a few other announcements, and then we'll get into today's program.
Great, thanks, Mark. So following the EdTech Government Forum is the EdTech Industry Summit, which is May 5th through 7th in San Francisco at the Palace Hotel. The theme this year is Navigating Next. We have a great program lined up, so I encourage you to visit our website listed there, siia.net/ETIS, to learn more about the event, to check out the program and our many great programs that we also have at the conference. Also, there are some great sponsorship opportunities, and the registration deadline is this coming Monday, the 8th. Also, another event that we host yearly is the EdTech Business Forum, which happens in November. The exact date this year is TBD, but it happens every year in New York City. So I encourage you to visit our website later on this year around September, siia.net/ETBF for more information. And I'll quickly touch base on the SIIA CODI Awards and hand it over to Lindsay to discuss the Vision K-20 in the Market Survey. The CODI Awards is in its 27th year. The award is the only peer-recognized program in the content, education, and software industries. So each CODI Award serves as incredible market validation for product innovation, vision, and just overall industry impact. To learn more about the awards, I encourage you to visit our website, siia.net/CODIES. That's CODIES, as you see there, for more information. And with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Lindsay Harmon.
Hi. So two of the major functions that SIIA serves is to understand, one of the major functions SIIA serves is to understand what's going on in the software and information industry. We find that through our surveys a lot of the time. Our Vision K-20 survey is open right now. In fact, today is the very last day of the survey. That survey is open for any educator in a K-12 or higher education institution anywhere in the world. And this year is our first year going international with that survey, and It's a way to benchmark and understand what's going on in classrooms and schools and districts and how they're implementing the Vision K20, which is the vision for education in the future, to see what's going on with technology in classrooms and digital developments and all that kind of thing. So if there are any educators listening, I highly encourage you to take the Vision K20 survey or pass it along to anyone you know who is an educator. Today is the last day, and we would love as many responses from as many varied and interesting and different places as we possibly can get. The market surveys are surveys of the industry, specifically on the software side. We ask the companies themselves to tell us about their revenue and what's going on and in what markets and how much they've had in the past year. Those surveys are also open for, we have one for higher ed and we have one for K-12. It's a $1,500 survey, and anyone who takes the survey gets the report for free. Anyone who doesn't take the survey has to pay the $1,500 for the report. So it's a great way to understand what's going on in the market, see the different trends, new developments, and where the money is, basically. So highly encourage everyone to take a look at the market survey as well as the Vision K20, and you can contact me, Lindsay Harman, at LHARMAN at SIIA.net. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Lindsay and LaDerby. So let's get into today's program. Again, I'm Mark Schneiderman with SIIA. Let me introduce our speakers today. Sue Collins is principal owner of CollinsConsults. Familiar to many of you, she has over 35 years of experience in the education and technology fields. She's well known for her ability to bridge education, technology, and public policy. She had served on the Web-Based Education Commission in 2000, on the board of directors of iNACOL. She's began her career as a teacher and a district-level administrator and at the state level in Washington State. In the private sector, Sue has held senior positions at Apple, Compaq, Jostens Learning, and Big Chalk, and as well as Chief Education Officer at Apex Learning. And she is, as I said, principal owner of CollinsConsults, which provides business, marketing, and product strategy, education market intelligence, and research services to the industry. And included, of course, was her co-authorship of the SI paper on OER. Peter Levy is our co-author of the paper. He's Chief Operating Officer of Learning in Motion. Peter has more than 15 years of experience working at the cross-section of technology and education. He began his career as an analyst for Jupiter Media Metrics and later worked in various leadership roles in strategy and product development, business development for Scholastic, Big Chalk, and Wireless Generation, among others. He previously to his current role was principal of the Levy Consulting Group. And for the open source curriculum site, Curriki.org, Peter was responsible for partnership development with for-profit and non-profit publishers, school districts, institutions, and ministries of education. As COO of Learning in Motion, Peter helps the company serve as an ed tech content development organization currently building Common Core aligned content for a new tablet-based math program. So let me quickly address why SI developed the OER guide and then turn it to our authors. SI views open educational resources as one of many appropriate models for the development and distribution of content. Certainly some SI members are content developers, some are aggregators, some are platforms. So the SI membership represents really the whole cross-section of the ecosystem of digital learning. We hope that the paper will help fill kind of a gap in creating common understandings around benefits and challenges of OER, help bring to light issues around total costs, both initial development costs and total long-term ownership costs, help inform policymakers and decision makers who are investing in OER or making decisions around OER and really more broadly around educational resources overall. And we also, of course, hope that this will help SI members in the sector understand the implications for their products, inform their strategies, and help inform their business models. So to take us through the issues, I'll turn first to Sue Collins.
Hi, thanks, Mark. Good morning for everyone on the West Coast, and good afternoon to everybody on the East Coast. I'm on the West Coast, so I'm saying good morning. So the guide that Peter and I worked with SIIA on was really a collaboration, because you'll see that there's a large component of it that is devoted to public policy and what's going on at the governmental levels, and specifically related to Mark's work at SIIA, as well as what's going on in the market. So my job here is to kind of introduce you to the guide, tell you what's here, do some definitional things, and then we're going to talk about business models, and Peter's going to lead that discussion, and then Mark's going to come back on to talk about the public policy and governmental activities. So that's kind of the outline for today. So with that, let me just do a quick top-line review of the what's included in this guide. In case you haven't had a chance to read it, I know every one of you probably picked it up immediately and read it. But for those of you who haven't quite had the chance yet, there's some major topics here we covered. One is, SIIA's perspective, a more full, expanded version of what Mark just said. The definition of what open educational resources means and sort of the licensing around that, total cost of development and total cost of ownership, going back to Mark's point about how people can make decisions and providing some information around those constructs, business models for both nonprofits as well as for-profits, government and nonprofit activities. And then we have a set of FAQs, because some of the things around OER just seem to be most easily answered in an FAQ format. So we have 12 FAQs that you might want to have a look at. And then finally, just a glossary, which includes the Creative Commons licenses. So with that, let me just talk a little bit about some of the fundamentals of the guide itself. To get started, we adopted the most widely accepted definition of what an open educational resource is. And it has two sort of clear components or conditions. One is it can be a resource that resides in the public domain. Or second, it's been released under an intellectual property license that permits free use and repurposing by others. And those two things are very important when you think about the licensing of open educational resources. So first, free, there's no acquisition fee. And second, there's no royalty or license fee that somebody has to pay to anyone to revise, reuse, remix, or redistribute. And I won't read all those definitions, but it's really quite clear. It's free. You don't have to pay to use it, and you can do any of the 4 R's without any fee as well. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone, and there's a kind of a fuller definition of that inside the document itself. So a couple of facts about OER, things that sometimes get confused, because I think that one of the things that we've discovered is that there are many different views about what open educational resources mean, depending on your role in this market, whether you're a user or a provider, whether you're a publisher, a foundation. So these are the 4 things I think we want to call out. One is that free does not always mean OER. Free is one condition that you have to have in order to be an OER, but it does not always mean. So the web is full of content, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's free for you to reuse, repurpose, revise, that kind of thing. Many of those resources come with the implied or presumed tagline of some rights or all rights reserved. So that's one thing to remember. Creative Commons licenses are the most commonly used to define the role that an OER can play. That's not exactly the right word, but and there are 6 of those. Those are included in the glossary. Not all CC licenses mean that it's an OER. So there are some licenses that don't allow derivatives, but the majority of the CC licenses provide for the 4 R's, as we talked about in the definition a minute ago. Public domain content is OER. The difference between an OER and a public domain in one sense of the word is OER requires attribution. Public domain content does not require attribution. And finally, the point that is kind of confusing, I think, to everyone is this notion of free use and commercialization. You can commercialize an open educational resource if it is not explicitly prohibited through the licensing. However, at the same time, and Peter, make sure I say this right, please, there can also be terms of services associated with websites where OERs may reside. And I'm going to use Curriki as an example because we have some firsthand knowledge of that. The site itself prohibits the use of the commercialization of the OERs that are on the Curriki website. So Peter, did I say that right? Peter? Well, we're going to assume I said it right since I don't seem to hear Peter. And LaDerby, you know what might have happened is he might still be muted because he came in as a participant. So we might want to think about that because he's going to talk next here.
Yeah, it was just the web portion, but he didn't disconnect the audio.
Oh, okay.
I'll look for his phone number, though. Just
okay. Oh, he's in on another phone, he says. So anyway, so I'm going to turn this over to Peter to start talking a little bit about TCD and TCO as long as he's on the phone. So it's an 831 number, LaDerby. Okay, 831, I think 464-4161. Okay, do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So yeah, there you are. So
great. Yeah, let me just clarify. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning and talking about this. The specific example that Sue was giving, and this is true on a number of OER sites, is the content itself is released by the author under a license that would allow you to commercialize the content as long as you maintained attribution. But the terms of service on the website say you can't come to our website and scrape all of that content and then go sell it. Now, if you found that content on another site or somewhere else on the web, that's legit, but you can't go to that one source technically and scrape all that content and package that up and sell it. And that kind
Great, thanks, Peter.
Yeah, that kind of segues nicely into some of the business questions that we're going to talk about next. And that is, both about the sustainability model for sites and organizations that are doing this. How do they afford to do this? And then in response to that, how do for-profit organizations look to compete against that, or how can they leverage those resources in ways that can help them innovate and create some new opportunities? First, let's just talk a little bit about sort of what we talk about in the document as sort of total cost of development and the total cost of ownership. There's a big difference, as you can imagine, between an individual classroom teacher or an individual college professor using an OER in his or her classroom and trying to scale that across a building, a district, a community college, or a large college institution. There's just enormous challenges to the latter, whereas the former is pretty simple. The costs to using it in your classroom are pretty much nothing. I mean, other than the time it takes you to kind of go through it and make sure it aligns with your lesson plan. There's a lot more involved, and we detail that at pretty granular level, in the document. And what are all the things that are required if you wanted to do that, and if you wanted to scale that? And we break that into really 3 categories, which is initial resource development, which is, okay, we've decided that we're going to build an OER as opposed to we're going to use an OER. We're going to build one. We may use something as a base, but we want to iterate on that. So you've got issues of meta tagging to make sure that things are going to be searchable and findable. You've got issues of making sure you're using principles of universal design and accessibility so your content can be screen reader compatible. In K-12, you've got to deal with standards alignment. There's the process of bias check and efficacy-based research. You would probably want to build assessments, and you'd probably need to build multiple versions because you've got a range of browsers and operating systems and devices, and so there's a lot of challenges when you're trying to do something scaled up in that initial resource development. Then sort of the next chunk is the implementation and technology maintenance. So you're going to implement this across your system. You've got to do training and professional development. While you have to do that with any curriculum resource, in some cases the OERs have some added complexity because if you're on a site like Curriki and some other aggregators of OER content, different individual resources are licensed under different terms. So you've got to just make your teachers aware of those permutations in the licenses. Then you've got technology updates and maintenance and integration to other third-party content systems or learning management systems, student information systems. And then finally, the third sort of category of development is content and design upgrades, where over time you're going to want to modify the content as things change about the government in Egypt or Pluto as a planet. And then in instructional design, those types, the research on instructional design and pedagogy online are kind of constantly evolving, and with the increase in the number of people that are taking online courses, they're sort of seeing an evolving set of best practices. So you probably would want to be looping back every so often to go back and integrate some of those things. So that's where we kind of try to highlight the difference between an individual classroom or professor using content versus a district or a university trying to scale up the development of one. Certainly there are also pluses to that development. There's research that indicates that teachers and professors that are more involved in the development of their content are much more engaged in their class. And there's some data from the Tides report that sort of shows that the more engaged you are in your class, the better your students do. So there is while not causal, there is a correlation between development of your curriculum and the performance of your students. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about business models, because certainly for-profit publishers, I think, are starting to now fully take notice of the OER sites, and some are actually trying to work with them, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But first, let's kind of talk through the various business models that are driving these organizations towards sustainability. First, let me say that it's still very much a work in progress. OER in education has only been around for about 10 years. It's still very much a work in progress. There's still no clear path to sustainability. And as we'll talk about as we kind of go through some of these business models, there's many organizations, because they haven't really found the exact formula, are combining business models and looking for new ways to try to generate revenue, because there isn't a clear business model that anyone's really hit on. I think a lot of these organizations are nonprofits. They're very much mission-driven, and their sustainability is similar to that of other nonprofits, where they're fundraising and they're trying to sort of pick up small amounts of revenue to kind of keep the lights on. But none of them have really found a way to really thrive and grow substantially outside of when you've got a wealthy, benefactor, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And one model that I think is, particularly interesting that we'll talk about in a second is this idea that a nonprofit.org would partner with a publisher to try to help raise both of those boats. So we'll talk about that in a second. So the first of the business models is sponsorship and advertising, and this is exactly what you'd see on any website, some of the OERs now have the ability to have you sponsor things like newsletters or just specific interior pages. So if you're a math company and you're trying to reach math teachers, you could just sponsor all of the hits that are coming in on math-related content on a site, and you're starting to be able to pretty highly target who your viewers would be. We also have a model we're seeing used by the Monterey Institute here around membership fees, where they make some of the content available to individual users through one website called Hippocampus in their case, and then they have a subscription website, which is a member organization called NROC, and that gives you access to all of the courses that they publish, and as well as some additional exercises and assessments and things like that. So they're doing some value add for the members. And they've done quite well, actually, at the state level and large district level, getting people to sign up and pay the membership fee. Another model that we see is this freemium premium model. The most high profile of that model was for a long time Flat World Knowledge, where basically they were making college-level textbooks available at no cost online, and then they would charge you to print out the book or for flashcards or for other upsells. They made a decision in late 2012 that they were going to move away from that free model online, and they were going to have to charge while it's less than a typical textbook. They were going to have to charge for access to the online, and they just explained that they had to do that in the interest of the company's long-term sustainability. So that I think tells you some things about the challenges involved in giving everything away and trying to make money on some of the upsells. There's another organization called Better Lesson, which is in the K-12 space. They have a model similar to Curriki, where they allow educators to share the content that they've developed in their own classrooms. And they have a premium service as well, where they work typically with networks of schools. They're in the KIPP charter schools and Uncommon Schools and Rocketship and a couple of other networks like that. And their premium service gives them a lot of customer support tools and professional learning communities and some more sophisticated analytics about what people are doing with the content, which is pretty interesting. Another interesting model that we're starting to see that involves publishers is this sort of aggregation and custom services. So Pearson has done this both at the college and the K-12 level. And I know that Learning.com's marketplace sort of works with this model, where basically they have a sort of portal, if you will, of content, which includes a lot of their content, but also includes OER content. And it allows end users to create a blend of both the proprietary and the open. And I think that part of what we'll likely see in the future is people continuing to work with that model and adding in a level of custom services. So you might work with a district to do a needs assessment, understand really what their goals are, moving towards compliance with the standards, and then develop with them kind of custom playlists of content that will be used in the classroom that meets those standards. And then with the analytics tools, you could then see, well, these resources really helped kids understand this concept, and these other resources didn't. So let's now recommend to you that you swap out X for Y, and let's see how that works. And that more long-term consultative sale model, I think, is something that we'll likely see more of in the future. And I think Pearson with Olay and Project Blue Sky appears like they're heading in that direction. Two other models that I'll just mention briefly. One, grants and community donations. As Mark will talk about, there's a fair amount of activity from Gates Foundation and Hewlett and in the past MacArthur, all giving money to support the development of OER. Shuttleworth in South Africa also does this. And so they are substantial players in terms of the resources that are going into developing content and making it freely available usually under one of the Creative Commons licenses. And the last model I'll mention is just support from benefactors. And This is something that you see driving a fair amount of work around CK12, where that's they have no business model. They are entirely self-funded from the COSLAs, who this is their project. And Curriki was originally started that way by Scott McNeely. They now are using a bunch of other revenue models. And you see that also in the higher ed space, where people are with their personal fortunes trying to support one project or another. So with that, let me turn it over to Mark, and we can talk a little bit about policy initiatives.
Great. Thank you, Peter. In our education system, so much influenced by the public and government in terms of our public K-12 schools and public universities and colleges, that clearly policy drivers are a big factor. What we're seeing from policymakers at the international, federal and state levels are a goal to reduce costs and improve access. Also a goal of supporting content customization, which I think many in the proprietary side are responding to. And also we're seeing somewhat, at least at the federal level in the U.S., a kind of an ancillary goal of providing reduced costs for all content developers through ensuring that the license model allows for commercialization. I think underlying a lot of this, as many of you probably note, is the view from those who are controlling public funds that why would they pay per copy when they can sort of build it and own it? And I think that's a lot of the underlying view, the driving many of the policies. I think partly what the paper tries to do is Peter addressed around total cost of ownership and total cost of development. And a lot of what we're trying to accomplish here is to demonstrate that single-time, short-term investments are not really going to serve students and teachers well in the long term. We're seeing two major public policies playing out. One is where we have government direct funding of OER development. Usually they'll say, we want to build content. They will conduct, put out an RFP to hire a third party to develop those resources, and those resources will be required to be provided through an open license. And kind of the agency is, governmental agency is really kind of controlling that process. The second model is more of an indirect one, where a government agency would say, if you are going to use government grant funds to develop content, you must make that content openly available through an open license. You don't necessarily have to use the grant funds to develop content, but if you do, that content must be openly licensed. So we're seeing initiatives at the, as I noted, the federal, the state, the international level. The paper details many of these and cites some of the language. Won't take too much time to go through here, but for example, the National Education Technology Plan put out in 2010 by the Obama administration talks about the need to support the development, and I'm quoting, support the development and use of open educational resources to promote innovative and creative opportunities for all learners, and accelerate the development and adoption of new open technology-based learning tools and courses. The Trade Adjustment Act, the TACT program, is a $2 billion Department of Labor program. It was funded through the Recovery Act, and that provides grants to community colleges. To the degree that those community colleges are creating learning materials, the grant requirement is that those funds, that those materials must be released under Creative Commons Attribution License, where commercialization actually would be allowed by third parties. Subsequently, the Department of Labor came out with some clarification when questions were raised, stating that, in fact, quote, only work that is developed by the grantee with grant funds is required to be licensed under the Creative Commons license. Works created by the grantee without grant funds certainly don't fall under the license, and grantees can actually purchase commercial resources. So they're trying to sort of walk that line to talk about what is created with federal funding is open, other is not. Race to the Top has a significant priority for open. Quoting states, unless otherwise protected by law or agreement as proprietary information, the state and its subgrantees must make any work, e.g. materials, tools, processes, and systems, developed under its grant, freely available to others, including but not limited to by posting on the work on a website identified or sponsored by the department. So you see that they are pushing for open, but they are allowing alternatives if there is proprietary information or other agreement. And that's playing out also in the Race to the Top assessment program as well. At the state level, there are a large variety of initiatives. These are a few, many others addressed in the paper. California actually initiated something they were calling, positioning several years ago as an open initiative, but they weren't actually requiring a Creative Commons or open educational license. They were really emphasizing the free part. They've since shifted and are now moving with some initiatives more into the open side of things, and especially at the higher education level, there's a new initiative where funding is pending, but it would create a repository of open college courses and materials. New York, with Race to the Top funds, put out a call for development of curriculum modules, and again, the requirement was that those materials be openly licensed, so that and those materials are currently being developed. Utah has a notable effort now to develop and support and encourage the use of open textbooks for secondary language arts, mathematics, and science courses. They're working with CK-12 in some of that, and many teachers in the state are working on developing that content. In the interest of time, I'm going to move forward and just touch quickly on note some international efforts. Peter referenced, I think, the South Africa project. In British Columbia, the government is funding development of open textbooks for the 40 most popular courses in their public post-secondary system. That's being managed through the BC Open Textbook Project and the BC Campus organization. I think there you have a case, and several of these others are similar, where they are putting the government funding into where it can sort of have perhaps the biggest bang for the buck by funding courses in the most popular, funding materials in the most popular courses. Let me end with a few SI policy principles for legislators and government agencies. These are included in our kind of SI perspective at the start of the paper. These are not necessarily the views of our authors, but these are principles that SI is putting forward. The first couple address the point that we need to encourage investment, choice, innovation, and competition. And the concern is that anytime government agencies are investing in one thing, that may reduce choice in other areas. And so we just want to encourage a wide variety of approaches and ensuring that there is a wide variety of choices of instruction materials available. We want to make sure as well that in the future, we haven't seen this yet, but in the future, faculty and schools and institutions are able to use funding they get from a different governmental level or from their own taxpayers for acquisition and implementation of any materials, not just OER materials. And again, we haven't seen those restrictions yet, but we just want to make sure that those don't happen moving forward. Ongoing costs is a big issue, as we've referenced a few times. Government agencies tend to have single one-time investments, and those can have perhaps some initial impact, but what happens when those funds go away? What happens to the students? What's happened to the marketplace? So we want to make sure that policymakers understand that if they're going to get involved in this, they need to be involved for the long term. Cost benefit as well is a key issue. It's not just the initial development of the content that's key. We need to think, as Peter referenced, about the long-term changes that need to be made to upgrade the content, to upgrade the platform. These are costs that all materials will share, all instructional resources, whether open or commercial. I think the difference is that commercial providers understand that they need to budget for those things. When you have public officials are making these decisions, it's unclear that they understand long-term what's needed. Again, we hope the paper will inform that. Common review. If states or institutions have adoption and review policies, we think they need to apply the same criteria to open materials as they do to other commercial or proprietary resources. And finally, let's ensure that we look to public-private partnerships wherever possible to support development of materials and to support the curricular needs of students and faculty. One last point that I realized that I left out of the paper, and maybe try to go back and add that, is one that I've talked to a number of OER advocates about, which is to the degree that government agencies are providing materials and policymakers in an open license, that we should make sure that those licenses allow for commercialization and derivative works by commercial providers. Certainly something that the Obama administration has been very good in supporting, and I think it's a model for others, so that those works that can be developed with public funds can be leveraged to the greatest degree possible by private sector and other partners. So with
Thanks, Mark.
that, yeah, thanks, Sue.
So I was just going to comment that the advantage of SIA using a Creative Commons license for this document is we can make those changes in the document even if we weren't SIA. And so we should make that change, and I think Peter and I have one additional change as well. So how about we start a little bit of a Q&A session here. We have a couple of questions. Let me start with one that came in just a minute ago about how do OERs fare compared to traditional textbooks in the state adoption and review process? Are there OER-based textbooks being used in K-12 today, for example, statewide or in any of the largest districts? So Peter, do you want to take that first, and then Mark, we'll see if you have any comments about that?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. Again, still pretty early in the process here. CK12 in that initiative that that Mark referenced earlier about their free and open digital textbooks, what they did was they asked for submissions and then they scored everything following, it's actually I think done by the group that reviews Supplemental, if I remember correctly. But they scored everything.
This is in California, right?
California. They scored everything on their standard rubric, and the CK12 books did quite well. The CK12 also has significant initiatives in Utah and in Virginia. In Virginia, they have this this project they call the 21st Century Physics Flex Book, which is based on a CK12 book. In Utah, just last year, the Utah State Office of Education announced that they were going to develop and support and encourage the use of high school language arts, math, and science courses. And the math and science books were also based on OERs that were put out by CK12. So I think we're starting to see that happen. I'm not familiar with cases where they've gone into formal adoption processes, but it doesn't mean that they haven't happened. Anyone else have any knowledge on that? They want to chime in? Mark, anything you have to add on that?
Well, I think one issue is that there are different types of adoptions in various states, as many are aware, and in some cases there's funding connected, and what's being approved is a list that you can buy from. So if to the degree the materials are not being sold, that obviously makes perhaps the adoption in some ways less relevant, although certainly educators are comforted by the fact that materials have been reviewed and aligned to their standards. One other example is in Texas, where they actually had legislation a few years ago that one of the things it did was to have the state agency put out a call for development of open resources that would be funded through their adoption funding, state adoption funding. And as of a month or two ago, they actually had not had any materials submitted or developed for that purpose. So that was part of the adoption process, but it was, again, the state commissioning development of resources that would be explicitly open. So those are a few comments. It's something that we could take a better look at, though, in moving forward, because I think it's a good question.
Okay. All right. So there's a couple more questions. Mark, do you want to take this one first? What do you anticipate will be the impact on developers of paid resources in the states where OERs are getting more funding? Or Peter, do you want to take that first?
I was just sort of digesting the question.
Right.
You know, I think part of what we're probably seeing is really getting back to a potential shift in models, and it may, and I think it already is, causing content developers to become more service providers and providing. And that's where some of the differentiation may happen. So if content is sort of more and more becoming a commodity, then the services around those commodities can be helpful. I think at the same time, there's more and more sophisticated content being developed that is multimedia, that is their simulations, their learning games. And those are areas where I think probably the OER developer community is probably significantly behind. And so differentiation in the type of resource, I think, is another opportunity.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that you will see a bifurcation in sort of the level of sophistication of the technology between the for-profit publishers and the OERs. There are lots of smart people who want to share their knowledge. There are less smart organizations that can put together all of the various components in making a sophisticated educational technology product that tracks user inputs and, comes out with sophisticated analytics on what works and what doesn't and how kids are responding. So I think that that's one place where I would agree that where publishers are going to have to distinguish themselves by getting away from what Mark kind of referred to as the sort of more commoditized content. And as I talked about earlier and Mark was just mentioning, publishers are going to need to do more than just publish stuff and get it out there. They're going to need they will likely need to have more of an ongoing consultative relationship where they have some expertise that the district needs. And they support them through needs assessment and implementation and professional development, and sort of they see this much more holistically, where they're developing a relationship to help advance the success of the students in that district. And it's not just about here's some books or here's some online content.
That's great. So I think we have a great question to kind of wrap this up, and maybe all three of us can respond to this. So the question is, and let me, by just saying that, just say that for those of you who will be attending the meeting in San Francisco in May, there's going to be a topic on open educational resources. The three of us will be there and some others to talk about some of these other questions that we're not going to be able to get to today. It's really going to be much more of an open forum. So, but let's end with a quick go-around about the question that came, if OERs have been around for 10 years, why do we think they're becoming more relevant now? And then, Mark, we'll turn it back to you for ending up the meeting. So who wants to take that first?
I will make a couple offers on this one. One is I think that the access to technology is having an impact in a couple of ways. One is clearly that more access to technologies means that these open materials are more able to be disseminated, distributed, accessed, and the like. I think the second thing is that the investments in hardware are putting budget pressures, and I think that some educational leaders are believing that open license, their own development of open license materials can sort of save them on the content side and offset some of their hardware costs. I think that's an equation that still needs to be proved, and I think that's a false choice to think of it that way. But unfortunately, I think that in many cases it is viewed that way.
Right.
I'll turn
Peter?
it to
Yes.
I guess I would agree with most of what Mark just said, and I would add, part of it is just awareness of this whole concept of open educational resources. I know that when I was consulting for Curriki and I'd go out and talk about what the organization was doing, it was kind of a light bulb to a lot of teachers that were like, wow, we have a lot of knowledge in our district. There's a lot of really smart people here. The idea that I would be able to share lesson plans with them, sort of makes intuitive sense. It kind of brings us back to why we all went into teaching in the first place. So I think part of it is just awareness of the availability. I think that a big challenge for OERs has been about discovery and integration, and I think we're starting to see that this whole discovery process is getting a little bit easier. There's starting to be some sort of go-to destinations to find large quantities of quality OER material. And lastly, I think, would be sort of about the credibility of the content. I think when they first started, it was just a bunch of teachers posting stuff, and some of it was great, and some of it was, frankly, probably pretty lousy. And now through rating systems and the analytics on kind of usage and the ways that organizations are vetting, or in the case of CK12, they're actually not using the community to write them. They're hiring professional authors. There's now a pretty high bar for a lot of these organizations in terms of the quality of the content, and people are starting to recognize that if I go and look at those things, it's pretty reliable, and it has a lot of. It may not have everything that I'll find in a commercial offering, but it has a lot of it. And given that the price for me in my individual classroom is pretty much nothing, they're willing to give on the things that those offerings don't have.
So let me just add, the advantage of going last is, of course, you can just chime in on the things that Mark and Peter have both said. I do think that there is also a couple of other things that are going on. I think that as time has passed, the open educational resources have become higher quality, better done, more complex, more inclusive in terms of coverage of topics. And I think that has been a part of what has happened. And I think this whole notion of being able to personalize education has also played a role in that it requires more resources than have traditionally sat in a traditional classroom. And so with the need for more resources, because you need to personalize, or teachers are trying to do more personalization, the budget gets in the way. And so when an open educational resource is high quality, meets your educational needs, and is free, it's an additional bonus, and I think pushes up use. So how about, shall we try one more question? Let's try a higher ed question about MOOCs and their long-term prospects, and how many are venture capital funded. Do Mark or Peter, you have a thought about that? MOOCs being the big open courses, which of course are not necessarily OERs, because the open in the title actually means open enrollment, not open in terms of open educational resources. So Peter, Mark?
I don't know much at all about how those are funded, although I do know that there have been some VCs kind of getting behind this. My sense on those is long-term, the elite universities in this country kind of have nothing to worry about, because what people are getting there is not the same thing that what people are getting from a MOOC. And I think one thing that's important to note about the MOOCs is, in general, at this point, the completion rates are pretty low, single digits. The Stanford course that was run with 160,000 participants, that AI course, had, I think, under 10% finished it. I think under 6%. You know, it was definitely single digits. It may even be smaller than that, maybe like 3 or 6%. You know, fully completed everything and passed assessments. I think that community colleges, however, probably have more to be concerned about, because I can certainly see these kinds of courses with some kind of assessment and some kind of way to authenticate that it's you taking the assessment. You know, it becomes a pretty attractive way to get some of those lower level credits that in some ways are the bread and butter of community colleges in terms of their funding.
Yeah, I would just say quickly, you know, when we first started this paper, we didn't actually have MOOCs weren't referenced, and we added a little piece in. One of the things it did is made SIIA points that open means is different in this case. But I do think more broadly, MOOCs are about, you know, moving towards a different model of education and expanding access, and that's what open educational resources are. Some supporters are partly about as well. And it's really about empowering students, in the case of MOOCs, to reduce barriers to access and move through their learning without traditional barriers. And I think that in many cases, MOOCs, and I think this is what many of the institutions are looking for, MOOCs will be kind of an entry point for students to get into the formal educational market, whereas before they were being kind of left out. So I think that brings us, though, to the end of our time. Sue, did you have one last concluding issue for us?
No, I think that there was one last question about assessments, but I think that's just a little too long for today's thing. We'll pick it up and take it to the session in May in San Francisco. So you can count on it being answered there. But I think on behalf of Peter and myself, we just want to thank everybody for being here today and having an interest in this topic. We certainly have enjoyed the collaboration with SIIA in putting this report together, and we hope you find it useful.
And on behalf of SIIA, let me say a huge thanks to Sue and Peter for their incredible work in producing the SIIA guide and on this webinar. And we hope everybody will download the guide. I've got the URL on there. It's easily findable on our website. Don't hesitate to contact any of us on these issues. And we look forward to seeing you in San Francisco in early May for the OER session at our EdTech Industry Summit. And the MOOCs and some of the other issues addressed we'll be getting into more at our EdTech Government Forum this next week in Washington, D.C. So with that, thanks everyone. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Please stand by.